Hi, Elspeth. Welcome to the Neurodiversum podcast. Let's talk about you for a moment. You are a student.
Yes.
At what university?
The University of Sheffield in England, UK.
And what's your major?
Psychology, undergraduate.
And you specialize on autism?
So I've got two research projects as part of my final year. One of them is on autism and the other one I'm hoping to do on trauma. But yes, my special interest as an autistic person right now is autism and trauma.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to give you some ideas that I collected over time, having interacted with people who have been afflicted by trauma, and some pieces of information that I picked up along the way. So one thing I know is that on an MRI scan, trauma and autistic brain activity look very similar. And when I met a person that had trauma and we connected a bit, like we were more than just lose connection, where we'd talk about certain things, and I noticed for once she was a very sensitive person, and the way she seemed to experience the world, she would experience being overwhelmed, and it just seemed somewhat comparable or somewhat related to the way that it works for me with my autism. And then there's this thing, like, it seems to me that on the one hand, autistic people are somewhat more prone to trauma because they tend to be very highly sensitive, and they tend to also be somewhat narrow in the floor of expectations they have. And so when something happens that is totally out of their scope of expectations, it can be very unsettling. But then I think that autistic people are also given some sort of mechanism, some sort of thing where it seems to be easier for them to reintegrate trauma by themselves. And so I was wondering if any of that, what do you think about these things?
Yeah. So the research on MRI brain scans, I'm assuming. Yeah. Of autism and trauma. What I would imagine that those research papers are looking at is not single event trauma, but probably repeated trauma. So probably complex trauma, or more likely developmental trauma.
Let's explain that real quick for the audience. So there's type 1 trauma, which is associated with, like, let's say a car crash, or you get robbed with someone holding a gun to your head, something like that. So it's a quick thing, it's very intense, it overloads your system, and you might react with dissociation and other symptoms. Whereas there's type 2 trauma, and that's considered more to be a developmental trauma. So it's the repeated experience of certain things that diminish you as a person or your character, and you're in a situation where you might not be able to escape them, and so you have to repeatedly endure these things where, like, one situation in itself might not look that bad, but repeated over a long time, they can also be very severe and cause very severe trauma. And as far as I know, the type 2 trauma is considered to be more severe than the type 1 trauma.
Yeah. Type 2, like developmental or complex. I'm just going to stick with developmental. Complex can be either childhood or adulthood, but developmental is specific to trauma in the early developmental stages. Developmental trauma is like the the big picture of trauma, whereas like the individual events that happen within developmental trauma are referred to as ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE. And those are normally examples of abuse and neglect and other experiences like that. But yeah, back to the brain scan. I would imagine that I need to actually do my own research on this. That the brain scan of somebody with little t trauma, that's type 1, single event, would actually be quite dissimilar to someone with autism if they are already neurotypical, because that's a single event. They haven't had any developmental trauma that has been like rewiring their like certain areas of their brain since prenatal experiences. So it doesn't have like the huge impact on the brain that developmental trauma does. But with developmental trauma, because it can be prenatal, but also postnatal, and usually the earlier it starts, the more severe the symptoms and the presentation is, then that is more likely to look like or mimic autism. We do see a lot of overlap in the symptoms of developmental trauma and attachment disorders between developmental trauma and autism. So I would imagine that the MRI would look similar in certain ways, but because their brains aren't naturally wired differently, it would look subtly different from an autistic brain, because the autistic brain is naturally wired in a more diverse way. That makes sense. Yeah. That's my thought on that. What was the other one? Because I've already forgotten.
I'm now entrenched in the ideas that you just presented, so I already forgot my own train of thought, of course.
Yeah.
So we had the thing with the MRI. The other thing was that autistic people are at the same time somewhat more prone to trauma, but then seem to also have some sort of mechanism where they can reintegrate certain trauma all by themselves. Yeah.
Autistic people are definitely more prone to trauma. And now I do remember what you were saying. There is actually a model that I can use to explain what you were saying, and autistic people having a narrow idea of how things are expected to go.
Yeah.
There are actually a few models that could explain that. I'm going to use the Perceptual process framework. At the Autism Europe International Congress, Marjorie Tudal spoke on this. She's an autistic psychologist from Denmark, I believe.
Was she the one with the energy management?
Yes.
And the red hair?
Yeah.
Like not natural red, but dyed red.
Yeah. I have heard other speakers also use this framework to explain autistic experiences. So the perceptual processing framework says that people have schemas, like pockets of information to set an idea of what's going to happen going forward. For most people, for the general population, the non-autistic population, these are quite broad. And so the broader the schema, the more incoming sensory, emotional, and other environmental stimuli coming in fits within that model. But with the autistic population, these schemas are a lot more narrow, and so they can. This is one of the ways that it can explain some of the diagnostic criteria. I don't particularly like the wording of the diagnostic criteria because it's very pathologizing. But say repetitive restrictive behaviors. If you have that narrow schema, then that's what you're going. That's what you expect. That narrow idea of this is how I, for example, this is my schedule in the morning. I do this, that, and the other, and it's in this way every single time, in this order every single time, and I know exactly what's going to happen next. But because it's so narrow, it means that if there is an environmental change, a situational change, or if there is a sensory change, or if there's an emotional change or anything else, then that doesn't line up most of the time with that schema. So it means that the model is constantly being updated, which essentially means that the person is in a constant state of stress. It can be quite stressful having to constantly update. If you just have to do it once or twice because it's quite broad, or at least not as many times as an autistic person, then it's not so overwhelming. But because there's so much incoming information that doesn't fit with it, it's very overwhelming. So that's one of the ways that an autistic person is like more inclined to experience something as traumatizing, because it's more overwhelming. You could also look at the monotropic theory of autism. I don't know how many models you want me to go into, but I know a few.
Go ahead.
I am looking into the potential for myself also having ADHD, so I can talk forever.
No, it's no problem. So far, your presentation has been quite structured and can be easily followed. So just go ahead.
Okay. So there's a lot of talk on autism being monotropic. It's like monotropic thinking, monotropic behaviors, etc. So the monotropic theory of autism suggests that autistic people have like a really narrow focused channel of attention. So similar to the perceptual processing framework, in that it's the narrowness of that attention, and things outside of that attention either not being registered or seeming overwhelming because it's not integrated into that a channel of attention, if that makes sense. Where was I going with this?
The monotropic model in concerns to trauma and
and I think it's quite clear from personal experience and the experience of the autistic people around me and the research. Research and all of that shows that autistic people have heightened experiences, and I don't really understand why people think that autistic people are unemotional. We're probably the most emotional people on the planet. We just show it differently.
I agree. Yeah.
Like we experience stuff to and the most intense degree. And so because we experience things so intensely, we're predisposed to experiencing something that a neurotypical person wouldn't necessarily experience as traumatizing. But because of those two models that I've explained, it means that we could experience we're more prone to experiencing a more common event as more stressful, and therefore reaching traumatic stress levels.
It always bothers me when this narrow focus and the repetitiveness, when they are being framed in a negative way, because when I look at high achievers in pretty much any field, like think of a Michael Jordan, he didn't get that way because he had a broad focus. He had a narrow focus, and he trained repeatedly. And I think that a narrow focus and an ability to repeat something again and again and again. That's what you need to get excellent at things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so for like, I just think about these things, like I go about these things intuitively. I don't do research because I don't have the funds and the time. But so what I know is that the autistic brain has a higher plasticity, so it has a heightened ability to rewire itself. Could that be at the root of what I think is this heightened ability to reintegrate trauma?
To be honest, I'd not heard of the idea of autistic people being more able to reintegrate trauma. But I think from my experience and the experience of the autistic people around me, I think that's a fair claim. I don't know the research on that. I really doubt there's much research on it at the moment. There really needs to be more research into the specifics of autism and trauma. But yeah, research does show that the autistic brain is, some of the research anyway, shows the autistic brain is a little bit bigger. And it also has more connections, more neural connections compared to the non-autistic brain, which does account for some of the overwhelm because there's so much going on in that brain. And I suppose if you think about it, and this is again just me theorizing, if you have more neural connections, then you have more potential for changing those neural connections. If you have fewer connections, then there's not as much change that's going to happen anyway. But I suppose it is also relative to the size of the brain. But yeah, I suppose that would make sense. I suppose in counter to that, autistic people in general are also very unyielding because we don't like change.
Yeah.
But I suppose in the actual integration of trauma, yeah, I suppose. I have to think about that one. I need to do my research on that.
Okay. I currently work at a school. And there's one girl, when she originally came, I thought, she might be autistic. I don't think so anymore. But she was actually coming from a family where she was being somewhat neglected. There's another kid in the family with a severe disability, and so she wasn't getting a lot of focus, and she would talk a lot, and she had that typical thing that we associate with autism, where people don't know when to stop talking, and she would be like, how to say this in English? Like, she would invade your personal space. But the more she calmed down, like the more we got to her, and the more we started working with her and reached little goals, like that got less. And so, it kind of makes sense when we think of autism as some development being delayed or moving at a different pace than kids who have an actual developmental delay, neurotypical kids with a developmental delay that might present similar.
Yeah. I suppose it's interesting, the presentation that you just described of that student, because what you mentioned there, the fact that she might be a little bit neglected in the home,
Mm-hmm.
and has a sibling with special needs. Did you mention? Was that right?
Yeah. I don't want to give too many details because
no,
for
that's
obvious
fine.
reasons.
But it's interesting what you mentioned, because that speaks to me of bordering on attachment difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact,
what
you also described to me was that it's not quite there. I don't know, but the fact that she was able to connect with you after a relatively short amount of time, then maybe not quite, but like there is some significant, like maybe some more significant difficulties with attachment. But the interesting thing is that there is an interesting overlap in the symptoms of attachment difficulty and autism. So like what you were mentioning there was the difficulty with personal space, the not knowing when to stop talking. I think those were the two examples that you mentioned, right? Yeah. So from a neurotypical perspective, those would both be seen as, quote, attention seeking. And in attachment difficulty, that is like trying to get an adult's attention, because that adult isn't giving them the attention that they need. So that is a bit. That's like an anxious attachment style. But that does also mimic autism, because autistic people, like you mentioned, have difficulty knowing when to stop talking because of understanding all those social cues, because there's so many of them, but also personal space. Right. So both of those could overlap. So I do understand how when that child came in, you thought that she could be autistic, but then looking at the broader whole, the broader situation of family life, and then also working with her over time, that's a really good approach to identifying whether or not it's autism or trauma. Is look at the broader situation that this person is in and work with them over time. Because if those symptoms improve, I suppose, then it's probably not autism. But if they don't improve, then it probably is autism. And in fact, there is no need for improvement if it's autism. And it's probably a good thing if they are showing more symptoms if it is autism, because they're masking less. Yeah. Was there something else that you said?
No, I think that covered most of it.
Okay.
So, do you think masking itself can lead to type 2 kind of trauma if it's done with enough intensity?
Type 2 trauma. So type 2 trauma, the developmental complex, is normally interpersonal. So somebody
but
does
masking
something.
Is an interpersonal thing, isn't it? Like, where would you put it?
This is kind of my argument. Like, is it or is it not?
Okay.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
So the interpersonal trauma is like somebody doing something to you, or somebody not doing something that they should do. So I suppose the masking it's an interesting one, because it could be you're choosing to mask, and therefore it's not somebody doing something to you. But then at the same time, you're masking because, for one, somebody would do something to you that's not right. Like you'd be bullied, you would be discriminated against, you would lose your job. I don't know what that situation might be, or they wouldn't do what they should do, which is provide the adequate accommodations. So I suppose in that sense, it could be. I wouldn't necessarily say it it in itself would lead to trauma. I would say that it's like a symptom or a precursor of trauma. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The whole thing with masking is a topic that is on my mind all the time, because like there seems to be a phenomenon that especially happens in autistic girls, where I see it again and again in their biographies. They tend to suppress themselves. They tend to want to live up to certain standards until they have an enormous breakdown. That tends to happen somewhere in between 20 and 45, let's say. It's different for different characters and different life situations, but they tend to they want to keep up an appearance, and they're willing to like really make themselves suffer to do it. They're really resolute about it, and eventually they'll break down. They cannot do it anymore, and it oftentimes ends with an intervention in a clinic for a while, because they really have an utter meltdown where for a while they might not be able to take care of themselves, and so on. So that is a topic that I think about a lot, because it seems to be impossible to reach young girls to do it differently. There's something like you can try to explain it to them, you can paint a picture of it, but there's something where they'll just keep on keeping up that appearance. So yeah, that is something I think a lot about, and I was thinking about with the severity that they suppress themselves, with the resoluteness they display towards themselves. I was thinking if that could create conditions that are so harsh on the person that it's comparable, that the effects that it has on the person might be comparable to a type 2 trauma. That's what I was thinking about.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot of factors that also go into that, because I think there's various research studies on this, but I think that some research studies do show that there is a higher rate of developmental or complex trauma in females rather than males. And yeah, females do tend to mask. Again, the research does also show that females tend to mask more than males. I would say that there's more of a societal expectation on women to act a certain way. And I think that's one of the factors that leads towards that. Yeah, and I suppose thinking about masking, like, it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure on yourself, and it's a lot of either real or perceived pressure from other people. And when you get it wrong, because you have so much pressure on yourself, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame. And one of the key symptoms of trauma, big T trauma, type 2, is shame. A lot of debilitating shame. And like it's a constant cycle. And that's also one of the things that can lead autistic people to have suicidal ideations or self-harm, or turn to drug and alcohol substance abuse. Yeah, so that would certainly create an environment that would be a similar internal environment to developmental or complex trauma. Yeah.
And you just mentioned substance abuse. When you concern yourself with autism and trauma, is that something that comes up a lot?
Autism and trauma and substance abuse. So far, I haven't come across those three too much, but I have come across autism, trauma, and either and either suicidal ideation and or self-harm.
Okay,
Three
yeah.
tend to go together quite a bit.
Yes.
I think the substance abuse is probably more ADHD. That's not to say that doesn't happen a lot with autism, but I think there is a stronger link between addiction and ADHD than there is with autism and addiction. But I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, my experience is that a lot of autistic people are not necessarily open to drug use. Like they don't like the idea of losing control.
Yeah.
And that kind of is counterindicative of drug abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I know that some don't feel that way about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was all very interesting. Is there something that particularly interests you about trauma, or some aspect of it that you've found out recently about that you would like to share?
That is a very broad question.
It is. You can just pick one thing that has been sitting on your mind for a while, if there is one, and if not, we'll just move on.
Oh gosh. That's quite broad. That's quite big. I suppose. I mean, I'm fascinated by the overlap between autism and trauma. Like, the research that I was recently involved in showing that, like the overlaps between attachment difficulty and autism. And by the way, attachment difficulty is a form of trauma. Normally the disrupted attachment is what is traumatizing in developmental trauma. That's the traumatizing aspect. But for disorganized attachment, for example, non-reciprocal and indiscriminate, like the two of those both being symptoms of autism and symptoms of developmental trauma, that's fascinating to me. And I want to know what other symptoms overlap, and where are the nuanced differences? Like, how can you tell the difference? How can you tell the difference between non-reciprocal and indiscriminate, and whether or not it's autism, trauma, or both? And yeah, I'm fascinated by that. I'm also interested in autistic attachment patterns. I don't think there's much research on that at the moment. But just the fact that symptoms of autism overlap with symptoms of attachment difficulty tells me that typical attachment in autism is different to typical attachment in non-autistic individuals. But we need to see what the research says.
Yeah, attachment difficulties, they're kind of a mean one, because you start out with a little bit of trauma, and then you have difficulty with proper attachment, and then it can easily multiply because you make bad experiences. Like when, for instance, if you get too close to people, then they'll push you away.
Yeah.
If you are too distant, they'll forget about you. But either way, you end up alone and hurt, and might have only limited capability to understand what you did wrong. And that might lead you to not even trying anymore, which makes you even more alone. And loneliness is definitely a killer.
Attachment difficulty is a harsh cycle, really harsh cycle. Yeah,
it is.
Essentially disorganized. The desire to have that relationship, but that fear that person's going to hurt you. Like just across the spectrum of any sort of relationship, just the general friendship to a more intimate, like it's across the board for an individual with attachment difficulty. So it's like it's really difficult. Yeah.
One of my colleagues, she has this dog, and he perfectly he perfectly portrays that. Like, he's a really anxious dog, but he's also curious. So he'll come into your direction, and it's like weird to watch. It's like some kind of moonwalk, Michael Jackson kind of thing, where he walks towards you, but at the same time walks away from you. Like, it's very fascinating. It's very fascinating.
Yeah.
And he kind of perfectly symbolizes that wanting to get in touch, but also at the same time being so scared. And that being scared, of course, makes you nervous, makes you prone to make mistakes. And I think that relearning these things, you need to really get lucky to have people around you who are willing to put in the time and the effort to do that.
Yeah. Yes.
And then hopefully they also know what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's not an easy one to get out of by yourself. No. And I always say, like, people who don't do social learning well, every opportunity they get in life to learn socially, they will be learning less than someone else because they already have like this lessened ability to do it. So,
especially with autism, like that, you can really see how masking would play a part in that. Like, really wanting to build that relationship, but not fully understanding how that other person functions, behaves, how they interact in society, how they communicate. So wanting to have that relationship, but then also pulling back in fear that they're going to be hurt because they function differently. So masking to try to fit in, to then build that relationship, for that person to then find that their natural functioning is not typical. So yeah.
Yes. Okay. Let's get into the whole topic of Theraplay. First, let me know, like, what's your connection with Theraplay?
Yeah. So as part of my degree, I did a placement year. I worked with Chrysalis Associates in England, and we specialize in working with children with developmental trauma and attachment difficulties. And so these children are in adoption and care, so we work with the families as well. And our therapeutic model is based on Theraplay. So, so I spent an entire year doing that.
Did you pick that? Did you pick that position on purpose because you were already interested in Theraplay, or did you pick that position for another reason and then got introduced to Theraplay?
So I picked it for another reason. I picked it because they specialize in attachment difficulties and developmental trauma. But I was fascinated by that. I really wanted to know more. But I then found out that they use Theraplay, and I was then introduced to Theraplay through that.
Okay, and so from the way I understand Theraplay, it's a form of play that is led by an adult. So the way I imagine it, it's playful, but the adult kind of takes it to areas where the child needs to do some learning or needs to experience themselves. Is that kind of it?
Yeah. So Theraplay, like you said, it's a type of play therapy. It's child-led. It is specifically a child and family therapy. And it's built on 4 pillars: is nurture, engagement, structure, and challenge. So at the beginning of Theraplay, the therapist aims to build a therapeutic relationship with the child who almost certainly has attachment difficulties, especially in our service. So that it's quite a challenge, but it's so worth it. So worth it. And so when they're able to build that attachment with that child, they then look to sort of passing on that attachment to the adoptive or foster carer. For the carer to then build that attachment with the child. So the therapist kind of facilitates that, begins it, but then passes it on, facilitates it. So normally they have to do this because the child, their attachment presentations are different, because they have the attachment difficulties, but also because some of them are also autistic, and they, for a lot of the adoptive foster carers, they're new to this child. This child has only been recently adopted, so like within the past few years. Also, adoptive and foster families aren't always aware of the level of trauma that the child might have. That they're in their training to become adoptive parents or foster parents, they are made aware that their child might have significant trauma. But until you meet these children, you don't understand what significant trauma really means. By significant trauma, I mean significant, severe trauma. And it's intense. It's really intense. But these children desperately need like a really, really good intervention that is going to help them. And this we found is Theraplay was really helpful to be able to do that. So yeah, the therapist will use Theraplay. It's very playful. It's sensory based. There's some occupational therapy that's included in that because of the sensory aspect of it. Developmental trauma often has a lot of sensory differences compared to non-traumatized individuals, and so that's another aspect that's similar to autism, is the sensory differences. That's because of their prenatal or early postnatal experiences. So often they will be brought up, for example, not having enough clothes, not being fed, or being physically abused. So that in adulthood would mean they are triggered by the cold. They are triggered by being hungry. So at certain times of the day can be triggering, or like certain pressures can be triggering for them. So like,
do you think that could be the mechanism behind the hangry thing, where people get super angry when they're hungry?
Yeah, for traumatized people, that could easily be the case. Yeah.
Because I once had a partner. She was severely traumatized. Her father used to beat her up for all sorts of stuff, and she would get so mad when she was hungry. Yeah. So I wonder if that played any part in the interaction between her and her dad.
Yeah, that could be easily. Yeah. So do you want me to go into like the specifics of how Theraplay is adapted? Yeah. Okay. So we're actually working on a follow-up study at the moment. I interviewed three of our therapists, and some of the other APs also interviewed some of the other therapists.
Let me ask a short question. So, what age range is Theraplay aiming at? So
Theraplay is a child therapy. So I believe the youngest can be about 2 years old, because that's roughly when social interaction begins to really start to develop in typically developing children anyway, all the way up to age 18.
Okay.
So roughly 2 to 18, but normally Theraplay is normally the youngest that services will take is probably about 4 years old.
Okay.
Up to 7.
Yeah, when I read about Theraplay, like I could, with what they were saying in the text, I could imagine it a little bit, but it wasn't quite obvious, like, what is the therapy trying to accomplish? Because, like, if I, as an adult, go to a therapist and it's cognitive behavioral therapy, we'll talk about things and we'll try to change my behavior so that it's more healthy for me. So there'll be talk and reflecting about things. There might also be trying out certain things, which I might do with the therapeutic or not. But with a 2-year-old, you're not going to reflect on how a certain behavior will get you to the wrong outcome or something like that, because they're not really capable of that. And so I was wondering, like, if I understand it right, is Theraplay, is it like the idea that you create a situation that would just be healthy play, so that the child will just experience the healthy play, and then the therapeutic effect happens as a consequence of just being in a healthy situation? Is that kind of...
Yeah. So Theraplay, it depends on the client what the outcome that you're looking for. But Theraplay is interesting because it assumes that the child is on their own is not capable of change, because they're just a child. So that change needs to come from the parent, who is in control of their routines and their environment. And so the parent is in control of the child's experiences of them. So the change needs to come in the parent learning to co-regulate with the child. So with us, in our service, one of our biggest aims was to improve the attachment between the parents and the child. And so, that makes sense.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. And I think before I interrupted you, you wanted to say a little bit more about the inner workings of Theraplay. Maybe did we cover that now, or do you have some more to say on that?
Say on
the inner workings of Theraplay.
I mean, there's quite a lot that goes into Theraplay. It takes a lot of planning to do a session.
Okay. Take me into the planning. Like, do you have a concrete example of a therapy session you once did, and what kind of plan you made and how that worked out?
Yeah. So I wasn't able to be in the room with the therapist, parent and child, because having an unknown person there when the therapist is already an unknown person could trigger the child. So I watched the recordings of the sessions. So we would have a pre-assessment where we would gather lots of information about the child, and then so it will all be sent to the therapist. And so the therapist would have some information beforehand, especially looking at what's triggering for them, emotionally and sensory based, and as well as what is helpful for them to regulate. So what causes dysregulation, what causes regulation. So with an autistic child, from the broad sense of the session, it needs to be really structured. So from day one, there needs to be a beginning routine and an ending routine, so that when the child comes into the therapy room, they know that the same thing is going to happen at the beginning and at the end, and any other structure that needs to be in there as well. Therapist will also, if needed, set up the room in the exact same way every single week, for example. So again, they have the same sensory experience of that pillow, that purple cushion is in the same place in the same way every time I walk in, and I have the same snack every single week with the same drink every single week, and the fidget toy is the same. It's in the same room, so we have the same sounds every single week. And so as the therapist begins to understand the child, they then are able to co-regulate the child with the child. So they will, for example, let's go with one of the games is like a singing game. It's like one of those games like clap, hands clap, clap, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Similar to that. Not quite that exact example, but similar to that, where the parent, child, and adult are in a group together. And so we start with start the song at a standard rate, and then we do up regulation. So to increase the energy, you go faster, and then we down regulate together. So you slow it down. But then if the child becomes dysregulated at any point, you roll with that. So if the child starts to go into high speed and their energy goes up, then you'd follow that. You'd follow them all the way to the top, and then you come back down again by starting to slow it down. And then on the flip side of that, if the child starts to dissociate, you start going slower, and slower, and then maybe you need to bring it back up again. But if the child completely dysregulates and you can't co-regulate them to come back down into that just right state, then you might need to break out of that task and do something different. Come back to something that regulates them. Like usually food does that really well. Usually food does that really, really well.
Do you see a danger in using food as as a reward system in therapy, as that might lead to eating disorders?
So it's not a reward system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. A lot of parents have brought this up because a lot of children they tend to eat a lot. A lot of our clients either eat too much or they don't eat at all. And so using food is often a concern that they have. But you do need to take into account things like the prior experience. A lot of our children were neglected in that they didn't have enough food. And so they have what's it called? They have I can't remember what it's called now, but they have a mindset where there's not enough food. So they will eat at any given chance that they've got, even though they know there's plenty of food in the house. And some of them will have been brought up on sweets, for example, so they will crave that sugar because that's comforting, that's what they know. So in the session, if they become dysregulated and the therapist knows that a sugary treat is what regulates them, then use that. Like that's how the child regulates. Like don't take that away from them, because that is how they learn to survive in their early environment.
I can relate to that. I can definitely like cheeseburgers. They will regulate me very well.
Yeah, probably because you had quite a few of them when you were growing up, right?
No, actually, when I was growing up, I was growing up in Germany in the 80s and 90s when American franchise was already there, but not as common. And so McDonald's would be very special occasion. So I think that might be it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then the food for a child with developmental trauma is also very regulating because of early experiences of feeding as well. So that brings them back to like a state of calm. Normally like boiled sweets and things like that can be really calming.
So it takes them back to being held close to their mother. Yeah. And often one of the things that we do like to do is if the child is comfortable, often with our autistic clients, it isn't something we would normally do, but we would have the carer hold the child while the child is having their snack.
to facilitate that early environment. So one of the things that Theraplay wants to do is do something called gap filling. It will create an environment that's similar to an early postnatal environment to engage the early social right brain development, kind of like redevelop that, rewire, and start to fill in the gaps that the child didn't have growing up. And so the therapist would also do things like, to make it neuroaffirming, they would change some of the games that are involved in Theraplay. Like one of them is feather blow. Like you'd blow the feather to the child. That's to improve the eye contact, to like improve attachment there. But with an autistic child, they wouldn't do that because autistic children generally don't like to make eye contact. So you wouldn't force that. And in other things like lotion is often involved, but a lot of our autistic clients do not like lotion. I don't. I hate that.
I hate the residue it leaves on the skin.
I don't like it. No. So we make a lot of adaptations as we go along, but staying within the like core domains and conditions around Theraplay to make it a really unique experience, a safe experience for the child, so that a safe experience for the child, but also a learning environment for the parent, so that the parent can take that and implement it in the home. So Theraplay is not to just be used in the therapy room. It's meant to be taken out of the therapy room. You take what you've learned and you apply it to the home. So like the routines that the child does, perhaps use that at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. Or learning what regulates the child, what dysregulates the child, so that you start to notice the triggers in the child as you go throughout the day. But if you've noticed a trigger, then you also know how to regulate your child again. And so because the parent then learns the child's triggers, then that also means that they are able to structure an environment that the child feels safe in. And because the child then feels safe, the parent is then able to engage with them a lot more. And if they're engaging the child, they're also able to provide that nurture. And if they're able to provide all three of those, they are then able to provide opportunities for the child to learn. So you need the parent to learn before the child to learn. So they will introduce challenges, very small, very attainable, but it just gives that child the opportunity to have that sense of achievement. Just like, I don't know, being able to throw a ball up in the air and catch it 3 times. Some of our children are dyspraxic. Again, some of them have EDS, and EDS often have difficulties with coordination. So like something like that, just being able to say, yeah, I can do that. Look at me, I can do that. And being able to build up that self-confidence, the self-esteem. And so for the parent to then facilitate that, to show the child that they care about them, that they are able to nurture them and provide for them, that is the goal of Theraplay. And so the bigger picture of all of that is attachment, a more secure attachment, which would then reduce the trauma symptoms because the child is more regulated, is able to care to their parent. Yeah.
Okay, that was a very good overview. One random question. You have red hair, you have very pale skin, you don't like lotion. How do you get through winter? Like, don't you ever, like, you don't have to answer the question if you don't want to, but don't you ever?
I really like winter.
So you never have problems.
Really pale skin, so I burn all the time. I like winter.
Yeah, but you never have problems with dry skin in winter?
No, I do. Definitely. I just kind of have to get through it. I use as little as I can, and I just pat on the back of my hands and I rub the back of my hands together. So I don't have to get it all over my hands. I don't like doing that.
All right.
That just the back of the hands is just about manageable.
We're going to do another episode, Elspeth's skincare tips. No, okay, let's get back to Theraplay. There was one thing you mentioned a couple times now, and that's synchronicity. And that is something like I recently read the book The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And it's all about how we replace the play-based childhood with the phone-based childhood. So he talks a lot about how smartphones, 24/7 availability of internet access, social media, porn, etc., what effect that has on children. And one of the things he talks about a lot is the cost of opportunity that smartphones have. Because when you're wiping on a piece of glass, you're not having real human interactions. You're not having embodied interactions. And so I wonder if you can tell me a little bit more about the importance or the meaning of synchronicity. So you had the clap game. I don't know what you call it in English. Or the blowing of the feather. It's not as synchronous as the clapping, but it's still something you do with another person. You're both trying to keep the feather afloat, I suppose.
Yeah, or like just trying to blow it back and forth and catch it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what can you say about the need for synchronicity, the need to do things together with other people?
Yeah. So essentially, it's really important for relationship in general.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you, for example, if you see two friends walking down the street, one of the ways that you'll know that they're friends is the fact that they're walking in time with each other without realizing.
Yeah, the whole synchronicity thing is really important in learning empathy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also involved in empathy because you might not necessarily, hold on, let me put my words together. By mimicking the person that you're with, that kind of sends certain signals to the brain to then produce a similar internal environment to what's happening to the person next to you. If that makes sense. So if the person next to you pulls a frown or a sad face, and you mimic that, well, that produces a similar experience. That's quite a superficial example. I think that won't necessarily work for everyone. But things that are perhaps more subtle, but there's more of them. Then it's a similar internal environment happens there. So like it's really important for for relationship. So like for the adoptive parent is often not synchronized with the adopted child for certain reasons, like they're still getting to know the child, or the child is so dysregulated. So for the child and the parent to then become more synchronized, it means that they're both regulated. They're both it's the parent leading the regulation, but the fact that they're synchronized means that they're both regulated. So it's really important for building that attachment and maintaining that attachment. I think it does occur in autism. It just occurs differently. So, for example, parallel play. It's not necessarily like a sitting down and talking to each other face to face for a couple of hours, like a neurotypical person would do. I don't know what neurotypical people do. I'm just making up an example here. But like working together alongside each other like brings in some of that synchronicity. It's not necessarily conscious. It's often, unless you're purposefully doing it for the sake of purposefully co-regulating someone, it is a skill to learn to purposefully do it, and it's an important skill to learn, I would say. Normally, it's an unconscious thing that's happening. But with our Theraplay therapists, and what we also want to try to teach our parents as well, is to synchronize with the child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And now let's combine the before mentioned topics into one big one. So you talked about that trauma and autism can present very similar.
Yeah.
But how do we tell them apart?
Yeah. So I would start I'm taking the view of a clinical service. We would start by looking at the child's current presentation, and if we can, the child's previous presentation, and seeing, does it match up with an autistic presentation, yes or no? Does it also match up with a trauma presentation, yes or no? Often, if it matches up with autism, it will also match up with trauma. What we'd then do is we would go through with the 10 weeks of Theraplay. And often our parents will have to come back with their children for another 10 weeks and then another 10 weeks, because their trauma is that severe. They need to have like multiple lots of Theraplay.
Mm-hmm.
So often what we'll have to do is we will then do a post assessment. We will also have input from the therapist. Often it's a therapist who notices whether or not a child is autistic because they've been working with the child for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So if the symptoms will change over time, some of the attachment symptoms will improve. The developmental trauma symptoms will improve. The autistic symptoms will not, because that is how the child is naturally wired.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, those autistic symptoms might increase because the child is feeling more comfortable to just be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And is beginning to unmask. So one of the things that we might see is seemingly increased dysregulation, or seemingly increased attachment difficulty. So trying to tell apart those can be quite difficult. But what you will see is specific symptoms of autism are maintained throughout the entire therapeutic journey.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas specific symptoms of autism, developmental trauma and attachment difficulties will improve over the therapeutic journey. So seeing over the whole journey, if anything improves. Also, thinking about the child or the person generally in different situations. You might be able to tell the difference if a child is just traumatized or if they are just autistic or both, based on their presentation in different situations.
Mm-hmm.
So an autistic person, they might mask in certain situations and they might not in others, but generally their behavioral presentation should be the same throughout their day and throughout different situations. Whereas developmental trauma, the child will act differently with different adults because their attachment is disorganized. So with some adults, they might be really clingy, and with other adults, they might be really really detached.
Mm-hmm.
And they might show different trauma symptoms in different environments because those different environments will have different triggers. So it's not necessarily the same behavior in every single situation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have a autism radar?
An autism radar?
Yeah, like you know how there's a gaydar?
I have heard of it, yes.
So like, have you ever had a feeling about someone, oh, I think they are autistic, without them having told you, and it turns out you were right?
Yes. It happens a lot.
Well, so then maybe you're fit for the job of discerning whether someone is autistic or traumatized.
It's quite a lot of work trying to decipher whether or not someone's autistic or traumatized, because it's so similar. And what I just said there could also be reversed. Like, an autistic person might mask in one situation and then not mask in another. And so their behavior actually differs between situations, whereas a traumatized child will act the same in every single situation because they're traumatized, and they will have the same coping mechanisms throughout, and they will based on their attachment patterns have the same disrupted attachment presentations with every adult that they interact with. So it is very difficult to try to tell the difference between the two.
Yeah, I'd imagine. And where is it important to know the difference? Because
why is it important?
Where? Like, because you talk about how some of these things are display themselves quite similarly, and there's this thing that I hear a lot when, for instance, within a school or a comparable setting, I'll introduce a measure that is aimed at autistic kids, but then my colleagues will say things like, yeah, that'll probably work well for the other children too. So if it's so similar, and things that work for autistic kids work for other kids, or the other way around, like, why is it important to know the difference between whether the child is traumatized or autistic? Are there areas where you can do damage if you don't know, or if you can do harm?
I think it's really, really important that you do know the difference. Because if a child is traumatized and not autistic, if any sort of intervention is geared towards autism, they're not getting the support for the trauma. And it might be that they're experiencing that traumatic environment at home at the current day, and that might not be looked into. And so I think it is really, really important to be able to tell the difference, or to be able to recognize that the child has both, because you need to make sure that that child has the support that they need, just generally for the whole day, but also specifically down to the individual that is most likely to interact with them day-to-day, one-to-one, so that you know that certain things will trigger them because they're traumatized, and certain things will trigger them because they're autistic. Yeah. Sorry, I've been talking a lot.
That's perfectly fine. You get to be human.
Thank you. I am human. I think. Yeah. And being able to tell the difference between what's triggering the person, how it's presenting, and whether that person is autistic or traumatized. I think it is really important to know whether or not it's a trauma trigger or an autism trigger, because it could be that they're having a flashback, and that needs to be measured. That needs to be dealt with differently.
Okay, I'm not very familiar with flashbacks. I'm not sure if I ever witnessed it.
Okay. there's lots of different types.
Mm-hmm.
The stereotypical type is visual flashback.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm joking here.
No problem. Take your time.
Okay. Yeah. The stereotypical is a visual flashback where a person will have mental imagery of what has happened in the past. And that is most linked to little t trauma, single event.
And to an outside person, they might appear as if they were disassociating.
It could be dissociating, or it could be a lot more intense than that. So, for example, a person, let's give an example of a veteran who's come back from war. That's the really stereotypical example of somebody who's been traumatized. And they hear a fire alarm go off. They might then run for cover because in their head, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm in a combat situation again, for example.
Have you heard of trauma reactions of football players?
No.
I've only heard occasional stories of it, but where like a former football player, like retired, and he's in some situation and something happens that reminds him of kickoff, and he'll just start sprinting like a madman.
Wow.
Like in a restaurant or whatever. And
that's not something I've heard of before. I'm surprised because that's not linked to trauma.
Okay. I thought that playing football could be quite traumatizing with all the...
Yeah, I don't really know enough about football, I suppose, to be able to comment. But another type of flashback is an emotional flashback, and that is a lot harder to be able to identify and deal with.
Oh, I think I might be familiar with those.
Yeah, because they can be over a short period of time or a long period of time, and that's why trauma can sometimes be misdiagnosed as bipolar.
Mm-hmm. So the person will react to something with a reaction that to an outstander might appear completely inappropriate, way over the top.
That's an example, yeah. Or it could be more subtle, like a very subtle mindset change that happens over time.
Mm-hmm.
So they might have started out with within their functioning, having a pretty good mindset, mental health, etc. And then over time, something happens, and that causes them to have a slight mindset change, which then builds on itself and builds on itself and builds on itself, because it's one of those spiraling things. So, for example, shame. Something happens, and that person then thinks that they are shameful because that thing happened. And so shame is self-perpetuating, and eventually the shame becomes so big that other emotional difficulties come into play as well, like anger and dissociation. And then it can lead on to secondary symptoms such as self-harm and suicidal ideation. And so it can last for quite a long time, but actually have a more specific trigger. But what they're re-experiencing is their emotional environment from when they were being abused or neglected or in some sort of dysfunctional environment. Because they've been reminded, their mind has kind of been tricked into thinking, you're back there again. You need to protect yourself. So the shame kind of puts them into a freeze state, a dissociative state or a free state or a faulty state where they begin to people please to an extreme extent. And so that kind of keeps them safe because they're not doing anything to they're not doing anything that's going to offend anyone, that's going to cause them to neglect them, or somebody cause them to abuse them in any way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's one of the more subtle appearances of trauma is when someone remains in a dysfunctional relationship with another person where they're continuously exposed to toxic or the diminishing behavior, but they feel okay with it because they feel that's kind of what I deserve. That's kind of where I belong. I deserve to be treated this way. They don't even question it because that kind of fits in the let's say corridor that they're used to.
Yeah. For some people that's the case. For others, they're in that relationship and they're staying in that relationship because that's what they grew up with. That's similar to what they grew up with. That's all that they know. And because that's what they grew up with, that's what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, familiarity versus novelty.
Yeah, that's familiar. So a safe relationship might not be safe to them because it's unfamiliar, and they no longer know how to predict the other person's behavior because the behavior of a safe person is different from the behavior of somebody who's unsafe.
And that brings you in a situation where you repeatedly experience shame because you don't know how to interact with that healthy person. It makes you insecure and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that leads you to difficulties with attachment. It leads you to difficulties with attachment because you want that safe relationship, but you don't want that safe relationship. Like you want that unsafe relationship, but you don't want that unsafe relationship.
That safe relationship makes you feel really unsafe because it's so unfamiliar.
But it's safe, so it makes you feel safe.
Then it gets really confusing because you feel safe and unsafe at the same time.
Exactly. It's very confusing. It's very distorting. Like the whole world just kind of comes crumbling to pieces. For people who have experienced that sort of thing, it's really hard. It's really, really hard to be able to cope with. So I personally have a lot of admiration for people who do experience things like that because on a day-to-day basis, because it's so hard. Like, wow. Yeah. I have a lot of respect for people who do experience that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks so far for all of that. You're really good at talking about these things in a structured way. So this brings us to my final question. What do you think is autism?
What do I think is autism? That is a very big question. Okay.
Yeah, we use the word all the time, but then when you come to think about it.
What is autism? Yeah. I think autism is a natural difference in the way a person functions.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because it can be subtly different, but then it can be subtly different in different ways, but then on the broad scale, it's actually significantly different from people who are not autistic or neurotypical, I should say. Autism is a heightened experience of the world. It's a different pattern of thinking and behaving. Like everything's just kind of either 0 or 10. There is no in between. Like you never get a day where you're at 5. If you do, that's an anomaly. What is autism? I think autism is adaptive. I I think autism is in some ways adaptive to our current world, and I think it will be adaptive to for future generations. Some people see it as a disorder. I completely disagree. I often tell people, and this throws them off, I'm not disabled, I'm autistic. And that kind of throws people off. Like they find out one way or another that I have autism, and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you're disabled." And so I say to them, "I'm not disabled. I'm autistic."
Mm-hmm.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. My original language is German, and I actually like to use the word disabled. But it's slightly different. Like it's a similar word in German, but it's slightly different. In German, it's behindert. For both behindert and disabled, for both words, it is true that it's a passive word. So that's why that's why I like to use it. It doesn't really say anything about the person, but it says something about the environment. And I do think that living in a world that's populated by mostly non-autistic people can be somewhat debilitating. But
that's not the fault of autism. That's the fault of the environment.
Yes, true. And in my opinion, the word disabled kind of encapsulates that well. But then I'm not a native speaker, so I might be wrong about this.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily use the word disabled there. I would use the word disabling.
Mm-hmm. Ah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That is just the difference to the German word. Like,
yeah, and I think
where it disappears.
The model that you're describing there is the social model of disability.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I tend towards the social model of disability, although I do find the social interaction model explains it a little bit better, because I do think that there is room for the medical model. The social interaction model is like a combination of the social and the medical model together. It says that a lot of what people experience who are considered disabled is the result of environmental and social restrictions. But there are things that are disabling. So, for example, somebody, for whatever reason, isn't able to use their legs, or doesn't have any legs. That means that they have to use a wheelchair. Now that enables them to be able to get around, but in essence, they are disabled because they lack legs.
But if we lived in a world where 99% of people had no legs or had dysfunctional legs, then there would probably be such a thing, like there would be a kind of elevator that attaches to your wheelchair that you couldn't use if you didn't have a wheelchair. So the 1% that didn't have a wheelchair, they'd be the one who would have a disability in that scenario.
True.
And I think that, like, what's usually a lot more severe, for instance, for people in wheelchairs that might be lacking certain body parts, is like when and that might be like, maybe I have low expectations of non-disabled people, but I think that a lot of people look at someone who has no legs and they see them as that much less of a human being in a way, you know? Like when your legs are missing, that's like half of the height kind of that you would have.
Right, yeah.
And so there's half a person missing to some of the observers. And that like, it seems to me that is how some non-disabled people look at disability, because it's like when especially when you think of a person on a wheelchair, and we're thinking about the modern world that we live in, where a lot of the jobs are office jobs. Like they are not in any way or shape worse at an office job than anybody else. But an HR person might look at them, oh, they're in a wheelchair. That'll be problematic, you know. And it seems that, like, the different expectations that people have of people with a visible disability tend to weigh heavier than the actual disability.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, I think with autism as well, like the stereotype of that disability, like they're still human. They might just have a different skill set. That person in the wheelchair is still human. And just because they don't have legs and can't walk doesn't mean that they can't still get around. Doesn't mean that their brain isn't still functioning. No, it is. It is definitely still functioning.
Yeah, and it's weird because in some situations you get a bonus for being autistic. So when I'm at how do you say that? When you apply for a job, what the talk, the first talk you have with HR, what do you call that? Like you send them your papers and they invite you to, what do they invite you?
An interview?
Yeah, an interview is the word I was looking for. Exactly, yeah. You're at the interview and it's for an IT job and you mention that you have autism and they're like, oh yeah, it's a good thing. But you're at your first date, let's say as a male with a female, and you mention, I'm autistic. It might be like, you'll never see that girl again, even though she might feel very different about it if she had only found out at the 5th date that you're autistic or whatever. Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah. Or like a lot of the talks at the autism conference, Autism Europe International Congress, some of the talks were focused on autism in the medical world and how a lot of autistic people have been removed from medical training programs, or lost their job in medical professions such as psychiatry because they have disclosed an autism diagnosis, because they have been told that because they're autistic, they cannot empathize and therefore cannot be a psychiatrist, or for other things like they're autistic, so their processing speed must not be high enough. But actually, with autism, your processing speed can either be low or high. It doesn't, like, either way. If you have low processing speed or high processing speed, that doesn't affect. It'll affect you in different ways. You will have different challenges, but you will also have different strengths. It still means that if you want to do that medical degree, if you want to be a psychiatrist, go for it. So the only thing that's holding you back is other people's attitudes.
Yeah, just make sure that you know. Like, before you tell someone that you're autistic, make sure you know that person.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Trust that person beforehand. That's really, really important. But obviously, if it is someone like an employer, we do have, in England anyway, we do have things like the Autism Act 2009 and the Equality and Discrimination Act, Equality Act 2010, and the Discrimination Act 19 something or other. So if somebody does discriminate against you as an autistic person, you can go to higher up and wave those acts in their face and say, you can't do this. But you do have to have a bit of courage to do it, to be able to do that, because that person higher up might not listen to you because you are autistic. So you do, as an autistic person, you do often have to enter in quite a few battles in life to be able to get to where you want to go.
All right. I'll take that as words of encouragement.
Yes, please do.
And
words of encouragement, but also words of warning. Life is hard.
It is. Life is hard. That's a good phrase to end this interview on.
Yeah, there we go.
So thank you a lot, Elspeth, for taking the time. Yeah. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Hopefully we'll have another topic at some time in the future.
That sounds good.
All right.